Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo. Very excited on the show today. We have Puja Bharwani, who is the PR and marketing director for Southeast Asia at Antler, as well as the founder of What's the Story. So thanks for being on the show, Puja.
Thank you so much, Joe, for having me.
Absolutely. And we have an exciting topic, which I think a lot of people are going to find very interesting, which is creating a very strong brand narrative, particularly in Asia. But I guess the first question is, why does that even matter for most brands? Why does it matter that they have a powerful brand narrative?
Well, we are definitely living in an era that is completely the polar opposite of mass marketing. The internet has brought about niche targeted marketing. And as more and more brands emerge to cater to different categories of customers, different demographics of customers, different um, types of people, the internet is it only in a way enhances the use of brand narratives that are targeted, that are powerful, that have an impact, and really build a relationship with their customers.
Yeah, the targeted one is quite interesting because this is something I'm very passionate about, is really finding your niche. So I guess the question is, once you've found your niche, how do you build your narrative or story on top of that?
So I think the first thing to do is it really depends on where your target market lives. When I mean where, I mean on social, as well as now obviously we need to use more online methods to deliver your messaging. But when you find out where they are and how they communicate, then you use that, not only that platform, but engage in people that they look up to if your brand is not known. So whether it's if it's a B2B very tech heavy product, or it's really a B2B product, obviously LinkedIn is very powerful. There are a lot of questions that go in, even at Antler, as founders start new companies that don't have any brand name or are not known. They're like, should we market the company or us? So it
Mm.
really is a case by case basis on whether the founder is already known in the industry, and therefore there will be this trust. There will be a degree of trust that the industry and the consumer has, because they're like, if so. I'll give you the example of one of our portfolio companies, Base, which is a halal vegan cosmetic product for the Indonesian woman, built on a tech platform, personalized. So the founder, Yaomi, was a beauty blogger, and had a massive following on Instagram. And so when she started, she already had that trust in the industry, and
Mm.
she had this long list of people waiting to buy her product. So she used her brand to launch Base. Now I've seen obviously other examples that are trying to reimagine the space. So I'll give you an example of another one of our companies, also female founder, Fig Fertility, which is basically trying to change the conversation on fertility and not making it something that you only think about when you want to have a child. Fertility is a health issue. So, targeting a market that is not thinking of getting pregnant but should be testing through these kits, and fertility is like a holistic health approach. So things like that, she's going all out on awareness about this topic and bringing in experts from whether they're doctors, whether they're nutritionists, and trying to do this whole 360 approach to building awareness on this topic that she's trying to change the conversation about.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, which is if you already have an audience and leveraging that to build the brand. I'm curious at what point, for example, it starts as a founder-led narrative or story. At what point does it become a company story, if you know what I mean? So, for example, if you're leveraging the name, at what point in the company's growth do you say, okay, now do we switch to a company name
Yeah.
or story instead?
So it really depends on the space again and what they're doing. If they are really trying to disrupt something and do something really differently, then you need to show traction and validation, right? So as you grow, whether it's bringing on a first big name customer. And
Mm.
now one of the very interesting things, especially in tech and for SaaS products, when they decide, okay, we want to start getting publicity and noticed a bit more, whether it's, not just media, but, bring just telling their story on public platforms.
Mm,
It's usually, I tell them, like, make sure you get at least one known customer who doesn't mind sharing that they're using your product, because that in itself is a milestone and validation that what you've built is needed in this industry right now. So, timing and all that. So there's obviously, and then if you have something that's highly dependent on your user base, how many sign-ons do you have, but how many conversions do you have, and what model is your product? Is it like a freemium, then a subscription? And so there are all these things that we gauge. Sometimes there's really no point. You can make a lot of noise coming in, but if you're sort of like, you've made a lot of noise but people are not really convinced, and then they don't convert into either paying customers or loyal customers,
mm,
that is a bit worrying, right? And that happens sometimes in consumer focused brands, because A, the consumer is fickle, B, there's just so much noise out there if you
mm.
look at certain industries, and therefore I really encourage that you offer more than a product in the long term. If you want a loyal consumer, you really think of a platform approach, whether it's education and knowledge, and offer something of value that they can take away, not just please buy my product, it's going to solve your problem.
Yeah, you bring a really good point in terms of, like, I guess, boosting credibility of bringing in a well-known customer, talking about some of the work you've done. And obviously case studies are very powerful in the B2B space as well. What are some advice in really leveraging some of those? Because I think this is where people really struggle. They say, okay, I've gotten all the work done. I've gotten them to agree to be featured or talk about their story, but how can they really maximize that partnership with their clients?
It's always better for the client to mention the benefit that they had of using you, why you matter, just simple things like that,
Hmm.
more than you saying that they use me. But if if
Yeah.
if if you can, one or the other, depending on how big the name is, and
Mm,
also start small. Don't ask for too much. It can just start with a logo on your website, and then of course then you're like, can I have a blog on my website, or can I do a post on LinkedIn, or whatever medium is best for you. There's the power of, speaking of medium, I meant Medium, the platform for writing. That is
mm,
another really strong platform where VC community, tech founders, just there's no barriers to entry these days to share content, right? But
yeah.
obviously we want our content to be on a highway where it can be seen versus in a corner road. So that's why I think sharing your story, whether it's through, if you can't get into media, contributor platforms are big in a lot of the tech digital media space, and people want to hear stories. And one
Mm,
of the there's a saying which I follow very closely, and I think when you communicate, make your mess your story. Talk
mm,
about the process of building. Public building is a big theme these days, right? Like what you went through, what happened, how did you fundraise, moments you had. So people want to know, because and everyone realizes that being an entrepreneur, early stage building, fundraising, it's hard work. There's a lot of competition. Yes, there's a lot of money, but there's also you need to kind of really believe what you're doing and show that you've done the work.
mm.
So share those experiences in an authentic way, and it helps definitely.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I'm definitely going to remember that. Make your mess your story. I think that's incredible advice for anyone. I think it's something that I've always encouraged. I've tried to do myself, and I've tried to encourage people who I'm writing about, because going back to what you're saying, it's one thing to showcase the big wins, but I think as an entrepreneur or a smaller business, there are lots of challenges you face along the way. And I think even the recent example of the Bumble IPO, yes, she was a female, and yes, she's a CEO, and yes, she's young, and so on. But then if you look at the background story, it's actually quite fascinating in terms of how she, overcame some hurdles in her career and actually got to the point where she is now. So I think that makes the story even more powerful than just talking about, okay, here's a CEO. They went public. That's great. But I think we can relate to people because at the end of the day, we all have flaws. We all have struggles. And I think we can relate to people at a human level. And that's something I did
Yeah.
when I was at Forbes as well. So one of the stories I always tend to write about people's, ups and downs. So people who either got laid off and got rehired and became successful CEOs, or people who are suffering some kind of physical mental disability. All those things can really help tell their story because it's who they are. And I think that's a really good point. I really love that. Make your mess your story. I'm definitely gonna remember that one.
Right.
And also in terms of, you're big on developing narratives and toolkits and frameworks for different organizations. I'd love to hear in terms of your framework or how you start building toolkits around things like this.
So I always have an approach, to a customer first approach, like building that customer avatar, solving that problem, really digging deep on, the relevance of what you're doing in the space you're doing. Again, I know that cannot be done with all companies, but I have seen it done with pretty tech heavy B2B companies as well. There is a pyramid model that I use that really works, where it's like, the what are the emotional benefits of the company, what are the personality traits of the company. It's almost like and it's got the vision, mission, everything in it, but it's humanizing the brand essentially, because what are most businesses about, whether you're talking about people and culture, or you're talking about like I said, not just consumer focused. At the end of the day, even if you're using software, people are using it at the end of the day, right, to solve their business problems and processes. So please focus on what exactly the pain point is of the consumer, and what value it adds, and how does it add it. Like, is your because that will determine, everything from the visual branding to the journey. The customer journey has to be simple, fun, focused. Like I've seen brands use, color and language in such interesting ways, and that makes a difference, because the moment the consumer sees it, they're like, I can relate to that. That's similar to me. Or obviously there's the other version of it, where you're trying to do something so new that uh, you pique the person's interest just by standing out so strongly compared to everyone else in the market. So you brought up Bumble, right? And it's a really interesting story. When she left, when Whitney Wolf left Tinder, she had this idea, and it was very clear that from day one that I want to make this a woman first, approach, and make the first move. And she called up a journalist at Fortune, who knew, a female journalist that too, who knew obviously her, that she was one of the ex-Tinder. And Whitney was like, this is my mission, and I want to start my own. And and this journalist said, I won't do this story because it doesn't make sense. And she's actually written about it, saying, as a woman, if I didn't believe it, like, there's an issue with, with me. And it was such a realization that if you believe in what you're doing, and you're doing something so different, like, you see some of these founders who just go for it, and I call them, like, I call them angry founders, when they're really married to their idea, and they think that they're going to change the world with it. And sometimes it's good to see that, because you're very clear, but sometimes it's like, okay, let's get real, and really, like, test the market, do your A/B testing, do focus groups, see, do people really need this. So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up a lot of good points, and I kind of want to recap. One of which was obviously incorporating emotions, making sure you have a strong personality. This is something I'm constantly talking about in my workshops as well. I always tell my clients, like, give your brand a name, a specific, like a person's name. What attributes would you describe to that? And then I would have the team say, okay, you have an existing brand. How would you describe that? And see if there's any, like, schizophrenia when they're in the group. Are they powerful? Are they shy? Are they whatever it is? So I think it helps bring the team together and really humanize the brand, like you said. You also bring up some good points around leveraging visuals as well. So colors and styles and stuff like that, which a lot of times we think of brand narrative, we think of, the written copy, we think of the stories. But I think the visuals can be very powerful as well. And then the other point you mentioned was around standing out. I think this is where a lot of people really, really struggle, because it's easier just to copy and paste what someone else is already doing in this space. You see it all the time in B2B. It's really plaguing the industry. And I think those who are really standing out, like we're fortunate to work with, brands like Adobe, who, if you look at their visuals, you look at the style, it's unlike anything else. And I think that just goes back to the way they are, but it also helps them stand out too. So as an angry founder myself, I could I could relate to like that vision of changing the world. But it's tough nowadays because so many entrepreneurs come to me and they say, Joe, here's my idea for the business. How can I tell the story? And I say, okay, what have you done to first validate this point? Like, it's great to have a business idea, but what are some of the feedback you're getting from the market? Is it something they like? Is it something they hate? What are some things you can prove on it? Focus on that. Work it on your MVP, minimum viable product. And it's funny because I've been able to build products and businesses just from people telling me. So I'm a big believer in creating content just like this and sharing it and seeing what people say. And then a lot of times you'll get feedback and they'll say, oh, that's great, but have you thought about this? And that has really sparked a lot of different businesses that I've created over the years. But I think it goes back to your point of really, really understanding the customer. Most brands that I speak with, and I speak with a lot of different brands, don't do this very well. So I think this is always the biggest hurdle is who is it actually that you're trying to sell to? Who is it that you're trying to tell your story to? And it doesn't have to necessarily be customers. It could be investors. It could be partners. It could be, employees. All of these audiences matter when you're trying to build your brand.
Yeah, there are 2 points that you brought up there that I want to just say something about. When you talk about feedback, which is always good, but make sure you get feedback from the right people, because between Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and the products that they make, like the generation sometimes just don't talk to each other and will give you the wrong advice. So I've been in a room with founders talking about creating social clubs, through TikTok and, or just like, this whole concept of friends, and then and over different hobbies. Sometimes I'm like, I might not be the right person to talk to because it's not something I use, right? And even like talking for me to talk to one of my colleagues is, I would say, in Gen Z, and I asked her, so how is how has the pandemic been for you in terms of dating, because you can't go out, and lo and behold, to me she says, well, it doesn't really it didn't affect me that much because we were already on apps. So it's a completely different world. Whereas when we back in the day, like we go to places and clubs and meet people, right? When you're young and single. And so what I'm saying is, so what I'm saying is basically, like, feedback is important, but getting feedback from the right people is the most important. And there are a lot of times I've been in the room when whether it's investor or founder, and other people, advisors, if they don't understand the space, they're not going to ask the right questions. And that's really important. The big macro question is the ecosystem ready for it? And how would you know if the ecosystem is ready for it? Like, you need to be in that, not only in that space, but understand that generation and what's going on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. I think adding on to the point that you talked about at the very beginning is whether or not people will actually pay for something. Because a lot of times people say, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, but then they will never buy it. So either you're talking to the wrong people, or they're just saying that it's like lip service. So that's why I always try to create, like, going back to the MVP principle, like something like at a reasonably low price, like an entry price, just to see if people will pay for it if you're launching a new app or business. Because if you can't get people to put their money where their mouth is, all the great feedback and all the great, oh yeah, that's a great product, I love it, doesn't matter because it won't help you build a business if people are actually, flushing out their wallets or their credit cards or whatever it is, and actually spending on your products or services.
Yep.
Another good point. Another thing that you have taught me, which I hadn't heard about, I'd love for you to dive a bit more into, is a concept called brand splaining. Don't be brand splainers. This is something we talked about at the call last time. And I think it's a really good point. And I think I'd love to hear, kind of, for the folks who haven't heard about that term, what is that?
Yeah, so it's a relatively new term that I came across through one of some papers that I was reading, and we've all heard of the term mansplaining, and I
Mm,
still see people who mansplain basic things. And for I'm sure our listeners know what that is. It's basically when a man explains something very basic to a woman, thinking that she doesn't know what this means.
mm,
So brand planning is when a brand tells the consumer what they should be, as
mm,
opposed to what the problem is that they're solving. So I'm going to contextually take Women's Day as an example, and you'll see this every year. There's this whole thing about you're empowered, you're this, you're that, and you are a super mom, you are a super organizer, you are a multitasker. And I
mm.
think we've just reached a stage where you don't need to tell me who I am. I know who I am. Just tell me
Mm.
about how your product is going to change my life. So that's where I say the consumer focus should always be there, but not in an authoritarian way, in a guide kind of way. And
Mm,
one of the examples I usually use in our workshop is, you know, be Yoda. Okay, don't went to your consumer as a brand.
mm.
Like, just have that kind of, I know a little bit more about this than you do, and this is going to help you. So here you go. So that's an approach where I really still see some big brands doing. And it might work in some markets where women really need to feel that push and need that inspiration and that kind of conversation. But I think it's getting stale, and they really need to change the narrative around that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, and thought about this as well in terms of even how I market. I try to think of it as, to your point, as being a guide, but also being an educator as well, because I think the best brands are those who can educate and empower and lift their consumers with them, and I think that's something that not enough brands do. So looking at some of the best practices and like the best, professors or teachers from history, looking at Socrates and Aristotle and what they're doing in terms of asking questions and sparking dialogue, I think can be a great way for, marketers to your point, explain things in a way where it's educating them without kind of dumbing it down or making them feel like they're like it's a condescending tone. I think I know what you're saying. I see a lot of brands do that, and it's quite frustrating as a consumer to see that.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple examples earlier, but I would love to hear any other examples around kind of brands that have built kind of strong narratives in Asia, whether you've worked with them or not. What are some of your favorite examples?
So I think in terms of Asia, right, it's a unique region. Obviously, each brand needs to localize language, culture. Sometimes there have been examples where they come out pretty offensive.
Mm,
There was that D&G ad from China. There was that went wrong, and they had to remove it. Then there is very powerful stuff like Google did for um, uh, reuniting people from partition through their app. That's one of my classic favorites, and
mm,
and of course I think I relate to that as well personally, because I am from, I mean, my family is what was from what is now Pakistan. So we
mm,
went through partition, as in my grandparents went through partition. So I could
mm,
relate to that because I grew up hearing stories about how they lost touch with their friends
mm,
and have not. So that was so powerful, where you show the benefit and change and the use of the product
mm,
versus through a story, just classic brand narrative, and so real and believable, like this is what they do. um of course, Google's a a big brand, and you mentioned Adobe. Last year Adobe did this Heroes campaign that did
mm,
really well, and that was also very powerful. Another one was uh, SK2. I don't know whether you've seen this one. It went viral. They had to do, a Swedish company that a creative agency had to do a story for, not a story, or rather campaign. And their method was really different. They went into China for the China market,
mm,
and in the end, the story was not in the entire like a few minute film that they produced. There was nothing about SK2. It was about the marriage market in China, where these
mm.
women who,
Oh yeah.
after a certain age, are termed. I forget what the term is, but leftovers
Yes.
is the exact translation, right? And they basically, it became a movement again, where they changed the conversation. News outlets started covering it, where because real women spoke up saying that this is the problem, and we want to stop being labeled because we're quite happy being single. And the hashtag was change destiny, which was so powerful. And you know
Mm,
what I'm saying? So it's like, why was it powerful? Because it was they used real people. And I think
mm,
brands that use real people, um, if you find the right, stories, will go much further along um, than actors and trying to just say your product. So there's obviously different levels of this, right? There's actual real people in this situation where
mm.
these women are going through this. Then there is influencers, which are also real people and can talk about their experience based on how they use your product. And then they're micro influencers, which is now a big thing that's taking over, because they're also real people, but it's so niche, right? I mean, I hear brands like Eat Match, which is a social eating app in our portfolio, which basically grew their following by 1 million through TikTok, by engaging micro influencers. So it really depends on, basically, like, the real people involved. This is the real people era of marketing and selling. So now you need to pick which degree of realness you want to go to.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And this is something I always get questioned on LinkedIn, for example. People always ask me, why do personal posts always outperform company posts most of the time in terms of engagement and so on? And I said, it's because we can relate to a person far more than we can a brand. Even if we have a strong connection to that brand, I can relate to Puja much more than I can Antler, even though I know Antler, I know the brand, I know the team very well, but I can relate to you. I know your story. So obviously, I'm going to be far more inclined to engage with your content. And I think it goes back to what you're saying is really leverage the real people, whether it be your customers or your employees or your partners or whoever it is. That is, for me, one of the most powerful ways of really telling your story is to tell it through your other, like, people's eyes rather than through a brand eyes, because that way it's more relatable. And like I said, if you can tie that into any struggles they're going through, like in that leftovers example, it really makes it far more memorable, and I think ties everything we've really talked about together.
Yes. Speaking of, authentic and real, and people, we have to talk about the whole creator economy, since you yourself are kind of in that space. And
Yeah.
and what's your, everyone calls it the passion economy, and now with Clubhouse and it going viral, and people are trying to monetize individuality, as they say. So, I'm curious to know what's your take.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Throw it back at me. All right, nice. So I think for me, I always find it funny because not my intention was never to be a content creator. I just simply enjoy sharing what I've learned. And I think for me, the best content creators are those who are very well known, are simply doing that on a consistent basis. So you look at it regardless of any platform, or it's on LinkedIn, obviously it's very educational. If it's on TikTok or even Instagram, it's maybe more entertaining, but it's still the same kind of concept. It's where people who are really passionate about something and enjoy sharing it with others. I think that's, for me, is really the what this should be. I think, to your point, a lot of people see this and they say, okay, how can we monetize it as quickly as possible? And that obviously has an adverse effect in terms of their business and their perception. But so many people want to go for those shortcuts, and they say, okay, how can I build a brand, or how can I create content as quickly as possible to make as much money as possible? And my thoughts are, if that was your idea, if that's your intention, just don't create content, because the world doesn't need any more content. And I talked about this. Even though I create a lot of content myself, I'm like, the world doesn't need any more content. They need, content that can really help other people, whether it's engage them, entertain them, or educate them. And I think the world needs more of that.
Yeah.
It doesn't need more content, because there's enough crappy content in the world. It's one of the reasons I created this series, because not I felt there was a gap in terms of hearing from folks like you, your story, your tips, and so on. So yeah, I'm a bit on the fence, because
Okay.
I see the pros and cons of both sides.
No, I think that's great. It's good to hear different opinions, and I think it's too early to tell. Like, it's the how Clubhouse will go. Obviously, in this case, timing has been a big thing, but we're having our first event tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to it. And it's I think it's I like the spontaneity of it, and someone who is into audio content creation, I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a bit on the fence for Clubhouse myself, but LinkedIn invited me to one of their sessions, I think on the 21st. So I'll be joining that. But yeah, it's people were asking me my class as well, because I said I wasn't a huge fan when I started it, because when I first started, I was joining groups of people I didn't know, and it was a bit disorienting because there's like a bunch of voices going like blah, 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 blah. But I rejoined it. So I rejoined a session LinkedIn was doing. So my former colleagues were there. And I was like, oh, I know that person. Like I was far more engaged because I knew the voice, I knew the personality, I knew who they were. And I could sit and I could listen, I could do something else. So that for me was far more powerful and engaging because I knew them, I knew their story, and I really wanted to hear what they said. So the same is case going back to the content creators. You know, a lot of people have never met me in person. I'm rather shy in real life. And so people only know me through the content I create. And they say, okay, I still want to attend your events. I still want to hear things because I like what you have to say most of the time. Sometimes I don't. But I think that is one of the powerful effects of creating content and tell your story is it helps connect with people. And it helps them, get a better sense of who you are and be part of your community, for lack of better words.
Absolutely. And also I think I guess that's where the video content part of it, in my opinion, does better. It's been said that, Clubhouse shows that video is a bug, not a feature. I think for really big names, people who've already established themselves, who are either big figures on Twitter or people know what they like when they speak, it's one thing. But for newer content creators or however you want to put it, people who are trying to spread knowledge in various industries, I think like you say, right, that wanting to meet in person and being able to relate to what you see, right? Whatever you say, human beings are social creatures, and we need to know who we're talking to or who we're getting this information from, and it makes a difference. And it's proven that only 7% of communication is actually words.
Yes.
Everything else, when you're in person communicating, it's everything else,
Exactly. And I think this is something, there's a whole side story in terms of like I put off for many months because I was very fearful of even putting out videos. Even starting the series, I was terrified of doing because, I had gotten kind of comfortable speaking in public, but then when it came to doing it virtually, I was terrible. And I was very nervous and very awkward. If you look at the first sessions, it's terrible. So I think overcoming that fear, because putting yourself on video is actually quite tough. A lot of people really struggle with it. And even for me, I struggled and I say, okay, what can I do next? So I said, now I'm doing lives. And that for me is like the epitome, because I know that there are hundreds of people watching at any time. So if there's any mistakes I make, if I'm stumbling, if I'm rambling, like people are watching it at the moment. So it's one of those things where I always tell people, going back to your point of like laddering up, like you don't have to jump straight to video if you've never like post out a written article or anything like that, like, and you don't feel comfortable, it's not your wheelhouse, don't jump into it. Ladder up until you feel more comfortable and then start doing videos. Because I think to your point, even people who want to work with me, they say, oh, I watch your videos, I feel like I know you already, so yeah, I would love to work with you in your company. It's had such a powerful effect in terms of the business and brand we've created.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Puja, you bring up some excellent points. I really appreciate you sharing your experience. I guess the last question is, how can people get in touch with you and find out more what you're up to?
Well, I am on Twitter at Puja Story and on LinkedIn as well. So that would probably be on Clubhouse. Actually, let me take that again. I just want to make sure, because all my handles are so similar, I've forgotten.
Yes, I'm the same way. The Clubhouse. So yes, definitely find you on LinkedIn, Twitter, Clubhouse.
Oh, man, I'm gonna take that again. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. I am on Twitter and Clubhouse as Puja Story, and of course on LinkedIn as Puja Disha Bharwani. So please feel free to connect and drop me a line.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Puja. Really, really appreciate you sharing your insights today.
Thank you, Joe.
My pleasure.
And here's to your cuppa.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. And if you're watching or listening
Bye.
to today's episode, like I said, please do feel free to share this episode. A lot of really practical tips and really encouraging everyone to make their mess their story. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.